What if the death of the Pope was not just a tragedy, but the echo of a prophetic warning ignored for 2 millennia? Rome woke up silent. The usually vibrant St. Peter's Square was covered in a strange cloak of solemnity. April 21st, 2025. The entire world received the news. Pope Francis had died just a day after Easter Sunday. A coincidence for some, a sign for others. But there is those who do not believe in coincidences. That same day, the searches for Revelation 17 skyrocketed on the internet. The prophecy of the 8th king began to circulate on forums, social networks, religious channels, and even in newscasts international. A cryptic, almost forgotten passage came back to life as if the ancient pages of the last biblical book would have been written for this very moment. The beast that was and is not is also he 8th, and is from among the 7, and goes to the perdition. Mutter Revelation 17:11. What does this mean? Who is this beast? And what it has to do with the Pope? To understand the magnitude of the happened, we must look beyond the physical death of a religious leader. We must observe the symbolism, the exact moment, the numbers, the prophetic coincidences that, in reality, they might not be coincidences. Francisco was not just any pope. It was he first in America, the first Jesuit, the first in adopting the name of the humble man of Assisi. And his pontificate was anything but ordinary. Reformer, disruptive, loved and criticized. His figure aroused passions, fears and prophecies, and now, falling just after the Easter, the day that celebrates the resurrection of Christ, his death is covered with a spiritual veil, as if his departure will symbolize the closing of an era and the opening of another, even more mysterious one. Because the Easter is the victory over the death, but also he beginning of a judgment for those who do not believe. Was coincidence that he died in that precise moment? Throughout the history, many have tried to decipher the secrets of the apocalypse. Some see it as a metaphor, others as a prophetic code, and some as a map of the final time. But what is clear is that in its pages, nothing is left to chance. Everything has weight. Everything has a hidden meaning. The echo of the prophecy has been activated, and with he, a new wave of interpretations have begun to emerge from the depths of the religious and conspiratorial thinking. There are those who they claim that we are witnessing the literal fulfillment of the biblical text. And you, who are watching, this now same, are you ready for what's coming? 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when come, for a short time must last. And that phrase, written a few years ago, almost 2,000 years in the book of the Revelation, continues to baffle believers and scholars alike. Who are these kings? What represent? Are they human figures, empires, or prophetic symbols that point toward an inevitable destiny? For centuries, many they have interpreted these kings as empires that marked the history of the people of God. From the ancient Egypt, which enslaved the Hebrews, to the imposing Rome, under whose domain Christ was crucified. Among them appear also Assyria, which devastated the northern kingdom, Babylon, which dragged Israel into exile, Persia, which dominated without piety, and Greece, which tried to impose their culture on the faith Jewish. Each of these empires not only exercised political domination, but rather attempted to suppress the divine, supplant God, and subdue the faithful. But that is just one of the possible readings, because in recent times, an interpretation has emerged much more specific and disturbing. It all begins in 1929, the year in which the Vatican officially becomes a sovereign state thanks to the Lateran Treaty. From that moment on, popes were no longer just spiritual leaders, they also became heads of state, and it is precisely there where a theory is born that many they consider a modern revelation of the apocalypse. According to this vision, the 7 kings are not empires ancient, but popes who have governed from the foundation of the Vatican state. The first, it would be Pius V, followed by Pius X, John XXIII, Paul VI, John Paul I, who died after only 33 days of pontificate, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI. 7 figures, 7 authorities, 7 sacred realms. But then an 8th, one last, Francisco. Francisco would not be a new beginning, but the continuation from the previous one. The prophecy says that the 8th is one of the 7, which could be interpreted as an extension of the reign of Benedict XVI, who he resigned from the papacy, something unprecedented in the modern history. Francisco collected that legacy. It transformed it, exposed to the world. And now, with his death, the pieces of this interpretation fit together disturbingly. If we accept this reading, if the popes since 1929 are really the kings of the apocalypse, then Francis is not simply the last pope. It's a prophetic marker, a warning, the test living that the times already announced they have started. His death would not be a coincidence, but the fulfillment of a divine script. Both interpretations, although different in form, converge in a same fate. Whether we see the kings as historical empires or as papal figures, all routes lead us to the same place, the rise of an 8th power, distinct but born from the previous ones. A power that does not seek redemption, but walks straight toward the perdition. And if that's true, then what's coming after could change everything. For more than a decade, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was the face visible of a church that was trying to reinvent himself. He was loved by many, questioned by others, but ignored by no one. The first Latin American pope, the first Jesuit to occupy the throne of Peter, the first in choose he name of Francis, evoking the saint of Assisi, symbol of humility, poverty and reform. Since his appearance in a balcony from the Vatican in 2013, it was clear that he was not coming to continue a tradition, but to challenge it. However, there are who, they believe that their role is far beyond what visible, that his pontificate, his figure, his mission were already written ago ages in the pages of the Apocalypse, and that his death, the day following the Easter 2025, was not a simple biological end, but the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. In the previous chapter, we saw how some scholars identify the popes of the Sovereign Vatican as the 7 kings of the Apocalypse. Benedict XVI, the 7th, scored a milestone with his historic resignation. And Francis, his successor, did not break with he past, but continued he same system, in the prophetic narrative that it converts in he 8th king, but not just any king. 8th, the biblical text is clear, this king comes from among the 7 and heads to the perdition. The figure of Francis has been anything but conventional. He reformed the Vatican from within, faced scandals of decades, spoke of ecology, migration, social justice, and tended bridges with others' religions. For many, it was a voice of hope in a divided world. For others, he was an ambiguous figure, too open, too tolerant, too human. Divisions within the own clergy, tensions with ultra-conservative sectors, and his constant call for a poor church for the poor became an uncomfortable character for the established power. But the 8th king is not necessarily a tyrant. He doesn't need to appear evil. The prophetic doesn't always manifest itself in the grotesque. Sometimes it hides behind the apparent goodness of the modernity well-intentioned with sweet, disarming speech, because the most dangerous deception is that which resembles true. And if Francis was really the 8th king announced, then his presence was not just reform, but transition, a bridge between the institution and something that is about to emerge. The death of Francis at this precise point in the calendar Christian, just after celebrating the resurrection of Christ, resounds with symbolic force. It marks a closure, an end, and perhaps a beginning, not a new papacy, but a new prophetic era. One that will no longer be led by men with cassock, but by a global system that concentrates spiritual, political, and technological power like never before. The 8th king already has left, but the mystery is just beginning. Because if his death was the sign, then what's coming could be the final outcome of the great prophesied conflict, and you are living it in real time. Among the most disturbing images of the apocalypse, one in particular has become the center of debates, interpretations, and fears. It is the vision of a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, with 7 heads and 10 horns. A scene that seems taken from a nightmare, but that keeps a deeply spiritual and political message. This woman is not just any figure. She is described as dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. In his hand holds a golden cup full of abominations, and in his forehead a name, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and of the abominations of the land. Many have tried to decipher his identity. Some see it as a metaphor for human sin, for the corrupt system that dominates the world. But others, with more precision and risk, have directly linked with a city, Rome. Not just any Rome, but the one that sits on 7 hills, the one that dominates the kings of the earth, which you dress with the power of the religion and politics intertwined. In this context, the woman represents not only a geographical city, but a spiritual structure, an organization that, instead of leading to God, seduces with power, wealth, and authority. The beast on which he sits, it is not either simple symbol. It is a power that was, that is not, but that will return. A system that already has existed, which disappeared for a time, but it will reappear with more force. 7 heads, according to the biblical text itself, are 7 mountains, but also 7 kings. What connects us again with the prophecy of the 7 and the 8th? If this woman represents an institution that has enriched itself at the expense of the faithful, who has persecuted the saints, and who gets drunk with his blood, then we are not talking just about the past. We are talking about a present that has disguised as tradition, of a structure that carries ages, building his throne not on the rock, but on gold, the fear and the manipulation, a spiritual Babylon that hides behind sacred garments. And now, with the death of the 8th king, the attention returns to this figure. Because the text does not present her as defeated, not yet. Her judgment comes, but still dominates, still seduces, still reigns. The question is, until when? Will his downfall be the next act in this prophetic drama? Is the world witnessing, without knowing it, the outcome of a story that began centuries? The signs, they seem clear to those who dare to look beyond of the veil. The woman is sitting, the beast is moving, and the scenery is now ready for the final act. Easter is, for millions of believers, the most sacred celebration of the calendar Christian. It is the day that marks the victory of Christ over the death, the resurrection that redefines the history of the humanity. It is not just a liturgical date, it is a reminder that impossible can happen, that the darkness can be overcome, that every cycle can be transformed. That is why death of Pope Francis just one day after the Easter cannot be seen as a trivial coincidence. The symbolism is too strong, too precise, too prophetic. For centuries, theologians have associated the Easter not only with redemption, but also with trial. It is the door open toward the hope, but also the threshold that separates the faithful of the indifferent. It is the sign that the time advances, and that the divine clock does not stop. Death of the Pope right in that exact moment seems to mark something more than the end of a life. It is the closing of a stage, of a spiritual cycle that could be concluding in front of our eyes. And this is where the biblical numerology enters into game. The number 7, repeated countless times in the scriptures, represents the fullness, the divine totality, the compliance. 7 days of the creation, 7 trumpets, 7 stamps. It is the number of the closing perfect. But number 8, that's the number of the new beginning, the start of a stage that goes beyond of the time ordinary. 8 is resurrection, is eternity, is transformation. Francis died at the age of 88, after 12 years and 39 days of pontificate. Figures that for some are mere statistics, but for those who observe with prophetic eyes, they are signs. 8 multiplied, 12 as the number of the spiritual government, 39 days as an echo of the number 40, associated with testing and transition. All in his death seems to speak, to cry out even, not out of sadness, but out of change. The church had gone through many difficult times, schisms, corruption, persecutions, but always has survived. The question now is not whether it will survive, but whether we are witnessing its definitive metamorphosis, the transition from a structure ancient towards something completely new. What if the death of this pope is not only the end of a pontificate, but the dawn of a new prophetic era? What if the Easter not only celebrated the resurrection of Christ, but also heaped judgment on the religious systems that they have betrayed? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And the death of the 8th king just after the Feast of Eternal Life is not a coincidence. It is a message, an urgent call to see, to understand, to prepare. Because when the cycle closes, what's next after it's no longer just history, it's revelation. Never before the humanity had so much, and at the same time lost so much meaning. We live in an era of impressive technological advances, but also of widespread uncertainty. Wars are no longer only territorial, are also psychological, digital, cultural. Pandemics have shown that fragile that we are, and the economic crises have shaken even the most powerful nations. The governments, they stagger, the trust in the institutions collapse, and the churches, once bastions of hope, are divided, weakened, trapped in their own contradictions. And in the midst of this global chaos, the question arises more strongly. Are we living a time of the end? The signs seem to be in everywhere. The Gospels, they speak of earthquakes, plagues, rumors of war, hatred between nations, division among brothers, false prophets, and love that grows cold. These are not poetic phrases. They are clear descriptions, almost journalistic, of the current panorama. The world is changing, but not towards a utopian paradise. It's heading towards something darker, more controlled, more uniform. The rise of the artificial intelligence, the digital surveillance, ideological censorship, handling massive, all of that pushes us toward a reality that increasingly resembles a prophesied dystopia. What if that new system, brilliant on the outside but oppressive on the inside, is precisely the beast that the apocalypse announces? In this context, the death of Pope Francis does not feel like a maid isolated. It is perceived as just another piece of a puzzle that is fitting together too well. The 8th king has left, and with he opens a door invisible. A door that does not lead to the peace the world craves, but to the outcome of a spiritual conflict that has been brewing for some time, centuries. The ancient structures are falling. Traditional religion no longer manages to answer the most urgent questions of the society. And while some seek comfort in new spiritualities, others they hug nihilism as the only certainty. The collective soul of the world seems to be broken, disconnected, orphaned, but the revelation was not written to provoke fear, but to warn, to awaken, to prepare. The signs are not there, not to paralyze us, but to open us up the eyes, because the end of the times is not just an impending catastrophe, it is also an opportunity, a chance to return to the origin, to leave the lie, to reconnect with the true. Maybe what we are experiencing is not the end, but the last call. And you, who have seen the signs, what you will do with they. The figure of Pope Francis always was polarizing. For some, a close, humble, transformative pastor. For others, a modernizer who distanced himself from the sacred traditions. But beyond the human judgments, his life and his death seemed to be marked by something much bigger than ideologies. Their eye, passed by the history, had left a mark indelible, not only in the church, but in the very course of the prophetic events. Was the first Latin American pope, the first Jesuit, the first named himself Francisco. He was a leader who spoke of mercy, of ecology, of inclusion, of social justice. And what did while he was walking on a tightrope, trying to balance the tradition with the urgency of reform? His legacy, more than doctrinal, is symbolic. He represented the hinge between two worlds, the closing of an era, the echo of the seventh king, and the consummation of the eighth. But now that he's gone, the question isn't just what left behind, but what comes from ahead. The signs have aligned, the prophecies have been activated, and the world is turning towards an uncertain horizon. This is not a time for indifference. This is not a time to look forward. Other side. If the revelation teaches us something, it is that the true, it doesn't hide forever. It comes a spot in which everything is revealed, in which it invisible becomes clear, in which the symbolic becomes real. In amidst this bleak panorama, there is one figure that remains steadfast, a light that never goes out, a name that never changes. Jesus. Not the institutional symbol, not the cultural figure, but the living Christ. He who conquered the death, who promised to return, and who warned that before his return, many things must happen. He is the true protagonist of this story, the center of all prophecy, the only one capable of bringing redemption in half from chaos. This is not a message for the religious. It is a message for those who seek, for those who feel that something is wrong, that something is changing, that something is approaching, for those who cannot find answers in the screens, neither in the speeches, but they feel an echo in the soul that they says, "Wake up, today, more than ever, it is time to return to the origin, to leave the religiosity empty and embrace the living faith, to prepare, not with fear, but with discernment. Because if all this is true, then what lies ahead will require more than understanding. It will require courage. And now, I ask you, what have you? You've come this far. Are you ready for what's next? Are you ready to choose? In which side will you be on when the veil falls and the truth be revealed? If this story touched you, share this message with who not yet have heard. Subscribe to continue exploring the signs of the time. And above all, don't stop searching, because the time is near.